Today, we're going to be drawing the eye. So usually with the eye, you start off with a circle, of course, the sphere of the eye. Underneath the skin, we have to know what's under the skin also. So the eyelid, the top has sort of three parts, three angles, and then the bottom has two. So we'll start with the eyelid. So then above the eyelid, there's a shadow up here. Okay, so now we have the eyelid in place. The important thing is to set up where the eyelid is going to be. So the tear duct and the edge of the eye are on the bottom part of the eye, so it arcs above, almost like a diamond shape, elongated diamond shape. So we established the eyelid, the eye duct, the iris, and of course from the beginning you have to establish the catch light, where the light is hitting the eyeball, because that is going to be really the only place that you're going to have the brightest white is going to be the reflection. So if you establish the reflection early, you could keep it nice and light and bright and not get it too contaminated by other colors. So, okay, so now the iris is in. The iris is usually about halfway the length of the eye, of course, in the center. And then, so that's a good way to find out the size of the eye. Usually the tear duct and the edge of the eye are at the end of the eyeball. So now they call it the white of the eye, but it's not white because it's a sphere. So you have to shade the sphere mostly towards the edges is where the most shading occurs. So shade it in lightly, very lightly. Of course, then under the eyelid and the eyelashes are to shade the eye from light. So typically, if we're comfortable, the eye is always in the shade or in the shadow of the eyelid. So you could darken under the lid and the top part of the eyeball could all be very dark. So we'll do that more towards the end. We're trying to set up everything right now, and then we'll go into the heavy shading because you do want it kind of contrasty. The eye is very contrasty. The iris, pupil in the middle, the eyelid, the upper eyelid. So now the upper eyelid has a thickness and the lower eyelid also. You could notice the thickness more on the lower eyelid because it's lit, top lit. So the bottom, even though people like to darken this bottom eyelid in, ladies do it with makeup, it's not really natural to have a line on the top part of the eyelid on the bottom. You can have the dark line on the top eyelid, but usually not on the bottom. Doesn't look natural. You could shade under the eyelid, and you could shade where the eyelashes are if you wanted to make that more dramatic and dark. So the edge of the pupil is a little darker. There's some thickness. There's a thickness over the iris that bulges out a bit. That is not over the rest of the eye. So the eyelid does bulge out in the direction that the person is looking, slightly. All right, so now we're still finding the shading of the eye. We have the eyelid. Everyone's different. Some people don't have a deep eye socket or the eyelid, the top of the lid is not exposed. I made a nice curve, an arc to smooth things out, smooth the lines out, but it's not really an almond shape. Like if you draw the eye as an almond shape, where the eyelid's end is down at the bottom, the tear duct down at the bottom, arcing over the top, so it's a complex shape. The tear duct comes out towards the nose on a different angle of the rest of the eye. So you keep that in mind. And you could put a little shadow. Of course, people don't like darkness under the eye, but you have to have a shadow. You have to show that the eye is a sphere and it's round. So that's why I emphasize that there's really no white of the eye. So shade it light, very lightly, delicately shade in the white area of the eye, and leaving the reflected light as bright as possible. Sometimes I do shade the eyelid darker at the sides and the light, of course, from the top. You should establish where your light, always every drawing should be established where the light source is coming from, which is from the top, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the catch light on your eye has to be from the top because it's being shaded. So you can make the shadowing on the top part of the eye as dark as you like. So now I moved the shape of the eyelid a little bit. I thought it was a little too arced, and I wanted to make it a little more interesting and get the eyelid closer to the center of the iris so that it could shade it properly. All right, so now I'm moving the eyelid, and I'm not going to get involved with the eyelashes yet. In fact, I'm going to do the eyelashes as if they're out of focus. So that's the way I'm going to treat this particular drawing. I'm going to be focused on the iris and the inside of the eye, but not the eyelashes extend straight out, really. They don't really curve. They curve up, but so when you're looking at someone, the eyelashes should be coming straight towards you. So I'm going to draw them like they're out of focus. Sometimes you could draw them into like a peak, maybe little peaks or pyramids. And then, of course, you don't want to draw the eyelashes like a picket fence where they're all lined up. If you look closely at eyelashes, most of them point in the right direction, but there's always a couple that shoot off in different directions. The reason why I want to make the eyelashes out of focus is that certain people, I guess, genders, draw the eyelashes with makeup on because they're so used to looking at the female eye with makeup on. So now, right now, like what I do when I draw figures, I try to keep it at the beginning more androgynous, like it could go either way. It could go to become a female eye or a male eye. So right now, it's sort of something in the middle, and we'll see which way we want to go. That's why I'm really not doing the eyelashes yet. So I'm just going to make a hint of them, and then we'll see how it goes with that. So continuing, now I have my little tiny eraser. It's very tiny. I'll put it up on the screen. And you could go around and find little highlights. You can even get little tears. You know, you could have tears in the eye. So there's different ways you could draw. You know, there's not only one way to draw an eye. Let's face it, not only just the male and female, you could draw the female with makeup, without makeup. And then I was thinking of, even though I don't know if I'm going to go there, to do like a fun eye, like makeup dripping down. I would like to do that. But I think we'll just try to keep it free of makeup and as realistic as possible. So this is all done in charcoal pencils so far, all charcoal. and you could sharpen it nice and tight. And so now we're looking at the shadows. I'm going darker. I might as well go very dark on the top. Eventually I'm going to just blacken that all in because it's supposed to be in the shadow anyway. And so we're going to keep that dark, and we don't have to worry about the detail too much in the dark black areas. We'll worry about our detail in the lighter areas. Okay, there's the tear duct. The tear duct could look a little odd. I mean, I love the black line that goes over the top and then continues on the top of the ear duct, and that could be accentuated, but I'm not going to make it too large, the tear duct. But it is very interesting because it has moisture in it, and the moisture also will reflect the light, of course, differently from the skin and from the reflective surface of the eye, the liquidy look of the eye. So now we're going through the skin. Of course, you could give the skin some texture and draw, and you can have lines. There's all lines because everything's moving. The eyes are moving. The eyeball is moving. So the skin is stretched and moves and is pulled around the eye. So you could, now I'm shadowing in around the edges, giving it more of a male look, maybe. So we went from the androgynous look now to the male look, and I'm starting to establish where the tears should be, where the little tiny reflected light all over the eye, and now the iris. Okay, so the iris opens, of course. It's very interesting. It opens indoors in the dark to let more light in, and of course contracts, cuts down outside in the sun. So this is sort of a little bit closed. The iris is a little closed in, so this might be where he or she is outside. So maybe we'll just say it's outside. Even though it's outside, you could still make the reflected catch light look like a window or something, because that is the most typical shape of the reflected light in the eye. It's going to be a boxy curving. Remember, the eye is curved, so when you draw that light, reflected light, catch light, it could curve a little, and then it's a sphere, so you could have the end go in. So curving it and curving it a little more towards the end might make it look like it sits nicely on the surface of the eyeball. So now I got darker and darker with the upper eyelid. As you could see, we don't need to go and show the thickness of the skin of the upper eyelid because it's in a dark shadow. So where you can avoid overworking and rendering, why bother doing extra work inside the shadow when it might not necessarily look better if there's too much going on in there? Because I want to tighten it up, and I want the black from under the eyelid to be contrasty with the catch light, the reflected light, catch, or whatever you want to call it, the light in the eye. So I want it to, in the end, I want it contrasty. I don't want it very gray. I want a lot of black and white. And then maybe we'll add some color. All right, I'm kind of a little bit overdoing the skin around the edges. Maybe it's a little bit too much. If it is, then I'll just have to get the eraser out. Do that later. So, okay, so we're mostly doing this, of course, the straight on view. He or she is sort of looking slightly to the left, which is giving it a shape like it could be a right eye or a left eye. But It's the left eye. So, okay, so now if I'm going to do eyelashes, I want to make sure that I have the eyelid completed under the eyelashes. So we want to have a little, since the eyelashes are so dark, a little lighter underneath the eyelashes. So I kind of erase them, and I'm preparing the eyelid for the eyelashes that eventually I'm going to have to do. So even though, it could look, of course, very glamorous to have these very long, straight, or curved eyelashes coming all the way up, almost off the edge of the screen, but they're going to be shortened and hopefully natural. We want them to look natural. So the lower eyelids, okay, now I'm starting to put them in near the center towards the nose. They're so faint that you can hardly see them. So I'm going to draw them smaller towards the nose and then larger towards the edge. The largest ones could be on the end, and then it's not right over the center of the eye. Like I said before, they're not that large because they come out towards you. So how high could they really go? Unless you're looking up. Now when you look up, that's a different look. Okay, so now we're going to make it a little more interesting, the iris. So I'm drawing to start with this jagged line, a zigzag line, but you don't want it to be too uniformed. You don't want the eye to be too uniform because it has to be like a random pattern. It's almost like the eyelashes. They can't be too much in a row. It doesn't look natural if everything is too straight. It has to be a little bit random. All right, so I started with the zigzag line. Now I did the accurate small eraser to give me a light line that goes around the eye. Of course, I don't have to do the top because it's in the shadow. So basically, it's either in the shadow or under the reflected light, so I don't have to draw the iris. It's less than half of the iris that I have to draw. So let's give it some detail. All right, so I went from the zigzag line to sort of these up and down Y shapes. So as it peaks, you could draw a line to the edge. As it peaks towards the middle, you draw a line towards the center. And I also erased that too. So it's a white line, zigzag line, and white lines primarily going through the eye. And the way to visualize it as a white line is I have to darken around it. Of course, everything is relative. It only looks light if there's darkness next to it to accentuate the light areas. So now there's all little tiny lines in the eye. In fact, in the center, there's spokes that come out, and those have to be straight. The lines from the center of the iris to the edge should all go in a straight line, radius around the eye. But the other lines within don't have to be straight. So that's the only thing. So now there's a little bit of depth in the lower eyelid created by the shadow of, there's a little bit of depth also in the iris. See how it's darker at the edges of the iris? Usually most people are darker at the edge. Then the shading of the sphere of the eye, it's darker towards the edges, like you could see. So now we want to utilize the shading of the eyeball to accentuate where we're going to have our reflection. Okay, so now we're back to the interesting part, which is the reflection. So even though I'm not drawing very large eyelashes on top, we're going to be putting in the shadow that the eyelashes cast at the top of the eye. The lines coming down, and it could look like also an upside down skyline, a line, and then maybe like we have here in New York, the skyline with the tall buildings could be in the eye also. It reflects an image you could draw. A lot of times I draw a little tiny person in there. So right on the reflection, I drew a little person, like a head with some shoulders near the center. Whenever I did a very large painting, this is what happens. This is why you have to study the details very close up, because once you start doing large works of art, paintings or sculpture, what are you going to do? You have this gigantic eye, and you have to put detail into it or it doesn't look right. So a lot of times you put a person in the reflection of the eye, or some people put the photographer from a photo. Usually you notice all that when it's frozen in a photograph. So you could put a little person in there. So now, like we were saying before, we're going to utilize the shadowing of the white part of the eye to take out the little tiny eraser and the kneaded eraser to put in the tears. So I didn't want to just draw a line to make it look like the person was crying. So I did a couple of small ones, and I figured, why not paint them in the shape of a tear? Smaller and then a larger ball at the end, like it's sliding down the eye, a little thicker at the bottom, thinner at the top. So I took out my soft pastels and added some color to the skin. A little beigey color. I added a little bit of red into the tear duct, little red in the tear duct, but I don't want to make it as red as it looks naturally, because I like it to look a little bit lighter color. So we added some colors, some green, a little bit of a golden color, a little bit of brown in the iris. So now I'm just cleaning it up, making the eyelashes a little taller. I kind of erased the shadowing I had around the top, switching it from the male. So we started out as an androgynous eye. We went to the male eye. Now we switched it to a female eye without makeup. So as you notice, a lot of people, if they put makeup on, they want to darken in the inside of that eyelid, which I don't think would look natural. It won't give you the depth. So you have to leave it light and darken in under the eyelashes. Also, the eyelashes come from the outer part of the eye, and there's a little indentation in there, and there's little bumps on the inside of the eye. So some people draw them, and you can also draw a little shadow underneath the eyelash. So when you're zoomed in like this, you start to notice things that normally you wouldn't be drawing if it was a full face, or even, of course, a full figure, or many people. A lot of times when I draw people, I don't even draw the eye, I just draw a little line. All right, so we're kind of wrapping things up, and I don't know how much more I want to put into this. I know, like I said, I don't want to go into the eyelashes. You could, of course, very easy. So very easy to draw them more exaggerated and a little taller, which is very realistic of a person with makeup on, mascara on. The eyelashes would be much, much larger. They put that mascara on, and it really pulls them out, darkens them, and clumps them together. So thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you could be so kind to like and subscribe, that would be wonderful. So I hope to see you in the next video. Ciao.